Good evening, business students. So, I was reading this article in the Times today, and when I saw this lovely word, because Shein are considering floating via the London Stock Exchange, I remembered the past paper question from a couple of years ago that lots of students messed up. So, we will talk about stock market flotation. We will remind ourselves of the term IPO. And yes, this is forms of business. I know you think you know this, but it comes up every single year. We'll see if it does this year, probably will. And we'll take it from there. There's lots of questions they can ask related to forms of business, sources of finance from IPO, for example. So we're going to use this as an opportunity to go through our definitions. Sole trader we know is an individual that is also the business, okay? So they are one in the same with their limited and unlimited liability. So they're normally like self-employed, so they'll be paying self-employment national insurance stamp. They'll be taxed as an individual, which means if they go, I don't know, their revenue goes up beyond maybe 56 grand a year, I think is what the HMRC say, you should really become limited. More importantly is if your company is more complex and there's any risk of debt, that could be trade credit, that could be renting a car, that could be employing people, you want limited liability, okay? And it takes about half an hour on Company House's website, plus I think it's £100 registration fee. It's not expensive. A partnership, two different types of partnerships that we talk about in class. We talk about limited partnership and unlimited partnership. Unlimited partnership is, I don't know, two people getting together and they're going to run a small, not very complicated business that's never going to get in debt, and maybe they're just dipping their toe in to see if it's going to work before they commit to limited. If it's a limited partnership, then it's a limited company. We know that they have shares and they are not publicly traded. The word often doesn't mean always, so don't put always. And remember, there are some really big examples of limited companies. We've talked about JCB, for example. They've got shares and they choose who they sell them to. And that's a better definition than you might sell it to your friends and family, which is actually probably not correct for most of the limited companies that I've ever come across. So PLCs, obviously these are publicly traded, and yes, it's larger corporations, but it could be, when we look at the pros and cons slide next, you'll see that becoming PLC could also be about that global brand identity of the company or attracting key staff, for example. Now, you will also notice that limited liability, which means if you are doing a question on limited to PLC or PLC to limited, it could happen. You are not talking about limited liability. Limited liability is not an issue or a benefit because they both have it. Don't be that lazy student that just regurgitates all of their knowledge. Franchises we know, so we remind you of franchisee, franchisor. The franchisee pays the franchisor to access their business knowledge, massive network, marketing support, and all of those sorts of things. McDonald's is the example we've talked extensively about in class, and remember, McDonald's do not even trust their franchisees to chop onions. They buy the onions for them, they chop them up to the regulation size. This protects the brand identity of the Big Mac so you haven't got big lumps of onion in it. And also, because they buy so many onions, massive economies of scale, they can probably buy onions cheaper than the franchisee could. Okay? Downside is the franchisee can't update the menu. They can't do a special Thrapston burger or something dodgy like that just for because they think it'll be better, because they will be fined. Social enterprise is the one where students tend to get a little bit confused, and that's because the definition in the textbook is rubbish, and so is the one on Edexcel's website. But Tutor 2 have got a very good definition, which is very similar to this, and that's probably because they took I would have thought they borrowed it from HMRC. I like this definition because it's social issues. It's possibly providing employment and training rather than solely. Now, I like this. So if this rather than solely focusing on shareholder profits, it means they might a little bit. And then if you understand that this is a special type of limited company, they are a community interest company, but they can, under HMRC rules, take up to 35% of their dividends. If you are running a profitable social enterprise, it can still be very profitable for the shareholders. Okay? Don't think that this is a charity where everything needs to go back into the company or go to the beneficiaries. This is not a charity, it is a special limited company. Lifestyle businesses could be, I don't know, it was my 8th birthday the other day. I was a very happy Dalmatian. That puts me at 56 in dog years. Maybe I've had enough of working 80 hours a week and I decide to do 2 days a week consultancy. This means I might focus more on golf instead of maximising profits. I still need money to pay the bills. Maybe I've still got staff, but I decide what's important, and maybe I'll go part-time, living the dream. Online businesses gives me the opportunity to say that Amazon are not a pure play business. Pure play is only online, and Amazon have these super duper supermarkets, and also in the US they have loads of bookshops on university campuses. The majority of their business is pure play, however, so if the examiner puts in this year's exam paper that they are pure play, don't argue with them, just remember what the definition is. Now remember, going from limited to PLC is usually a sources of finance question. More importantly, what are they going to spend the money on? And your counter argument to should they or shouldn't they, think about where the money would come from if they didn't go PLC. So you would be thinking of bank loans, for example, or selling stocks privately, or selling other things to raise capital. PLC, limited to PLC, are usually a sources of finance question. So make sure you're practicing those if you haven't already. There's a reminder of stock market flotation and that IPO. And remember, this is the first time. You can't do multiple stock market flotations because you'll already be there. Now, looking at capital as one of our advantages, we've talked extensively about this. When you read the case study in a little while, you will see that they are expanding. It doesn't say they want to expand more, but they are expanding, and Temu are close on their heels trying to come into the UK as well. So a couple of years ago, none of us had heard of Shein. Most of you haven't heard of Temu. Hold tight, because here they come. So it could be that we get an enhanced profile. So if we're thinking about Shein want to grow into more westernised established markets, maybe being listed on the FTSE 100, for example, will give them more credibility. And it might be that they attract the more customers, but also some high profile partners. And it might be those high profile partners that then help them improve some of their brand reputation and move away from that sweatshop image that some of us still have of them. Now, when we're talking about liquidity, I've already mentioned what you could spend the money on, but in the case study it also says that the existing owners of the business might be looking for an exit. I think it says cash out. So it could be that this is a profit motive of the owners to cash out now whilst we've got high valuations, and maybe they think that this is a good time to get out. Why? We'll see from the case study, but maybe they're at the top of the market. Now's a good time to sell very quickly. Then we're talking about attracting top talent, because if you're a PLC, maybe the top CEOs around the world will want to work with you. Maybe as a limited company, they might not want to, because I suppose going from PLC to limited might be relatively simplistic, but going from limited to PLC of a big global blue chip company, maybe you don't have that high profile that some of the big shareholders will want coming into a PLC. So maybe being a PLC already might actually help them with recruiting that top talent. Remember, they may have loads of money, so they can go out and buy the competition. This could be their supply chain. This could be literally going and buying one of their direct competitors. It could be that they diversify into other markets. So if there was ever a big dip in fast fashion, at least they are covered. Remember when we looked at British Associated Sugar, Foods even, and they're a massive conglomerate from everything from Primark to British Sugar to Fortnum's and Masons and lots of other things in between. Now, the disadvantages for moving from limited to PLC is what you'll normally get quite excited over. So we're thinking about this increased scrutiny, but yes, but so what? Yes, you've got to publish your accounts, and if you actually read those documents, which I encourage you to, you'll see they're marketing documents. They're trying to persuade shareholders that they've invested their money well. They're trying to use these documents to attract other people, okay? But when you've got some claims of environmental and employment practices are a bit dodgy, then actually you are open to that criticism. But this regulatory framework, is it going to make them improve that much? Primark have had to improve, but that was mainly because of those, the horrible deaths in Bangladesh, and customers were starting to boycott their stores. They were already a PLC when it happened, and they let this happen, not intentionally, but in their supply chain. Don't know about that one. Go careful, don't just drop it in there without using context. Yes, we need to disclose, but who cares? And does it give a disadvantage for competition? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. You're not going to be giving away all your trade secrets. You're going to give away financial information, and you're going to be disclosing things like environmental and work practices. I'm not sure if it really gives away that much competition. Short-term pressures, remember, shareholders have a lot of power sometimes. They might be interested in increased share price and dividends in the short term, whereas if the CEO and his team or her team are focusing on global expansion, this is more of a long-term strategic plan. So we could have that stakeholder versus shareholder type question dropped into this. Yes, there are significant costs. When you're getting in the likes of KPMG, PwC, Deloitte's to come in, then it's going to cost a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to have this public scrutiny, and it's really, really important that these are regulated, because we don't want companies just floating on the stock market and disappearing tomorrow with my money. So we need to think about these things. And if you do have underperformance in share price, well, you need to double check about, you need to show that you have been very diligent about this. Now, public companies, yes, hostile takeovers. This is the bit that we all get excited about. It's so sexy, hostile takeovers. Unless it's mentioned sort of in the case study, please just don't mention it. Okay? So they might only sell 10% of their shares. There's not going to be a hostile takeover then, is there? You need more than 50% to do that sort of thing. Think more about shareholder influence and demands and things like that. Yeah, so hostile takeovers do happen, but very rarely, and you shouldn't be talking about that at an IPO stage. There's so much else to talk about, and generally, if you're talking about hostile takeovers before they've even floated, your answer is not going to be very good, and it'll be totally abstract. So moving on, quick refresher of this in context. London Stock Exchange, and here's where we need to think about what could possibly impact the share price, assess the likely impact of, assess the likely value of floating on the stock exchange, those sorts of questions. So we're thinking that they've got some very good financial sales and profitability. Okay, that's in the case study when you eventually get there. Consumer demand is very good for affordable fast fashion at the moment, and nice word there, brings us into forecasting. However, in the future, if there's an economic boom, maybe I'm not buying cheap fast fashion. Maybe that's why some people think that actually this demand will start to slow, because we're not in so much of a horrible cost of living crisis that we were before. And this is mirrored in lots of Western countries. The market sentiment, well, generally the analysts like this, so they'll recommend it to their investors. This sort of company is making a lot of money at the moment. Primark's very profitable, for example, and Shein are even bigger. Okay, maybe this is the way forward. Maybe this company is so wealthy that they can buy companies in multiple segments, so they can protect themselves of ebbs and flows between inferior, normal and luxury goods. Yes, they've got technology as well, so they've got all this tech in there to help them to get the stuff in the right place at the right time. But later when I show you the data extract, you'll see that this comes at a cost, and that's air freight. They make most of their stuff in China and they ship it around the globe on a great big jumbo jet. Yeah, not very good for our poor polar bear friends. So yes, it's good, tech savvy, lean production, less waste, all of those sorts of things. However, think about the polar bears, hey? Then we've got this, which we've mentioned before, and we'll come back to that in the case study. Yes, we've got regulatory scrutiny, and we would look for a quote. We're changing government soon, probably. So we need to think about this. The case study mentions loopholes in taxation. So maybe the government will change this if they allow them to become a PLC. That might be part of the agreement, maybe. Yes, there's competition, and Temu are the big competition at the moment, rapidly growing in the UK. Not as big as Shein at the moment, but maybe in the future they will. And market volatility, things change as we know. Now, I'd like you to pause the video in a second, and I'd like a supply and demand diagram for option 1 and for option 2. Okay, pause the video and we will go back and draw a supply and demand diagram together. Hopefully you pause the video. So first 2 steps are always the same. So we've got our price, we've got our quantity, 1 mark. We then draw our X marks the spot, that's where the treasure is, and D for down, and funnily enough, demand begins with D as well. And we're going to do an S. 2 marks, believe it or not. Every supply and demand diagram question is the same for the first 2 steps. So why would you possibly leave it blank? So we're going to draw this, and now we know that this represents the total amount of consumers at any given time and their willingness to pay for shares in Shein. This is the total amount of shares available at any given time, and trust me, Shein would love to be selling up here, and they don't really want to be selling down here, okay, for obvious reasons. Now, there's nothing on this slide that says they're going to increase the amount of shares that are available or to decrease it, so we're not going to move the supply curve. And that's what I would look for in a case study. It's not just, oh, is it supply and demand? It's, does it specifically mention supply in this case? No, it doesn't. It's all about demand. So we are thinking, if all of this is in place, then shareholders will either want to probably buy more shares, or people that weren't going to buy shares are now going to start buying shares instead of buying someone else's. So I'm going to put a 1 next to that, and remember, less is left, and clearly this is more, which is the other way. Okay, now we put our dots in. Drawing that curve gives us our other application. This becomes P2, this becomes Q2, and we have now got our analysis mark for the change in price and quantity demanded. Okay, now for this one down here, let's just say all of these factors are worrying shareholders. And they're thinking, not sure if I'm going to buy this, maybe I'll buy less, maybe I'm not going to buy it at all. So with that in mind, price, quantity, X marks the spot, D for down and demand, S, put our dots in, P1, Q1, 2 marks, 50% of our marks, exactly the same. Now we know already we're not going to move the supply curve, and our D1 is there. Now, maybe less people are going to buy these shares, or maybe they're going to buy less of them. Now, less is left, and here we're going to do D2, put our pretty dots in, and P2 and Q2. Make sure the examiner can read your labels. Hopefully that's useful. Now, nearly there. I know it's a long video, and hopefully you're playing it on chipmunk speed anyway. Let's quickly plan this. Classic hook in the question, H for hook, likely impact of, two things here, environmental and employment practices on the attractiveness to investors. So I'm thinking I'm going to need to demonstrate an understanding of environmental and employment practices. I'll do that in context, and I need to sort of define factors that could impact attractiveness to investors. Now, because there's 2 points here really, this is going to be a P however, and this is also going to be a P however. It's then going to be answer the question, justify, and I'm going to write a MOPS. Now remember, you don't need to write a separate paragraph for MOPS, but you could use a future orientated MOPS factor to help you justify your point. The justification in most essays that I read aren't very good. Quite a lot of students just repeat what they've already written. You're not going to get the marks for it twice, so why bother? As long as you're answering the question straight away. If you can't think of an in-context justification, just move on to the 20 mark and save the time. But you should be able to write a contextualised justification that is thinking about something in the future. And we'll give an example of that in a second. So we've planned the essay. That's my plan. So when I read the case study, I will know what evidence I'm looking for. I'm looking for something to do with environment and something to do with employment practices. This is data extract A, so we're going to put A next to that. And we can see that they buy stuff off the website. So maybe in my mind I'm thinking that might be a pure play. Okay, and then they're from that warehouse, doesn't sound very close to where I live, and I'm thinking that they're going to be doing loads and loads of exports. It mentions that they're avoiding export duties, which means they're exporting it. There's a picture of a plane there, which gives me a little bit of a clue about how, oh, hang on, this is number 1. So I've got number 1 there, I've got number 1 there. This is number 1, by the way. I've got my evidence already, really. I could sort of not bother about any more evidence for environment, but let's have a look. Import duties, and maybe that's something to do with political, and then we can see that they don't pay a lot of tax. Hey, well done for them. So here is, we'll call this extract B, and now we're looking for something to do with employment practices. We can go through this and we can see that they were accused of using forced labour. So I can put this down as number 2. Remember, you're going to have a separate data extract booklet next to you. They started that last year. So we've got that sort of thing already there. Let's see if we've got anything else in there to do with reading through the case study, which is what you should be doing as well. The company has faced criticism for potential worker exploitation, underrepresenting working hours. There you go, another bit of evidence. Stop reading, move on to the essay. Okay, so we've got lots of stuff there to do with that. Now, remember, we are aiming for level 4, not for for perfection. And we're aiming to do all of this in under 15 minutes. I'm sure you'd be a lot quicker than this video because you wouldn't have to revise all the other definitions. So we would have already had our, however, excuse my bookmark coming down then, and we know that this is number one, sorry, that's number one, and that was number two, okay? And the hook is on this. So this is what needs to be going into the end of your chain of arguments. Always start off with a good definition, and I put it up there instantly because I would have written this before going to the case study, and that's a really important thing. You write down a good definition as a foundation of a lovely answer. More importantly, you know what you're looking for. Now, I've written point, explain, evidence. You're not going to write this in the essay, obviously. It's just to encourage you to use that P paragraph or whichever structure your teacher has taught you. It's exactly the same if it's peel or, I don't know, pecan pies or stuff like that. It's all the same stuff. It's these standards that are more important than all these acronyms. I use P because that's what my students were taught in GCSE English. Why bother reinventing chains of argument? So our point is it could negatively impact it. Okay. The company's business model, which relies on air freight, we'll mark this as we go. Nice bit of application, can contribute to pollution, increase carbon emissions, and not only investors, but environmentally conscious investors. Okay, so investors is in the question, so it ain't context. It is if I mention what type of investors they are. Okay, so the case study states, that's a nice phrase to remind me as the student to actually use the case study. Our transport around the world with air freight, we've got the same thing repeated from above. Additionally, its production model leverages algorithms to identify emerging trends. It's got a quote around it, it's a bit obvious, it's from the case study, which can lead to overproduction and waste. Bit abstract there, but I understand. The resulting environmental impact may harm the attractiveness. You will notice that at the end of this chain of argument comes back, analysis, comes back to the hook in the question. At least it's answering the question. However, here's a counter argument. Some investors even, might be more interested in profits. Okay, nice quote with those profits there as well. $45 billion last year, probably paid £5.50 in tax. Point. Practices might harm the attractiveness of it. So in some ways, is this a perfectly balanced answer? No, it is not. But both of these are quite negative things. As long as there's howevers, there's balance. And if the examiner thinks that it's not really well balanced, well, if everything else is lined up, they're going to give me 10 out of 12 probably, and I'll do cartwheels on results day with 10 out of 12. You can decide what mark it gets after the video is finished. So the company has faced criticism with potential workers' exploitation and underreported hours. That's an AP for application, which can result in negative publicity and ethical concerns. This could deter investors who prioritise ethical employment practices. So instead of just saying this could deter investors, up here, environmentally conscious ones, down here, those that value this. So we've got a nice bit of analysis there. Then we need to interpret the case study. Case study mentions that Shein has been accused of forced labour, more application, and underreported hours, bit of a repeat, which can tarnish its reputation and deter investors. Back to the hook twice in one paragraph there, bit showy off really. However, counter-argument, some investors might overlook this as they believe the low prices and affordability outweigh the negative publicity. The company's low prices has been cited as a key factor for its successes. It might be that their customers generally don't care because they're going to get a £2 t-shirt. Overall, we would then pause, go back to the question. We've got likely impact of this and this on this. That's what we're going to answer the question with one sentence. Overall, Shein's environmental and employment practices have negatively impacted the attractiveness. So we've answered the question. That's actually an A for answer the question. Then we need to justify with either a MOPS in it or a quick justification, and then we'll write something that's future orientated. But I would much prefer to see future orientated MOPS supporting your justification, which will be in context, of course, if you want the marks. Without addressing these concerns before the IPO, so that's a bit more application, using that knowledge, and we're using this lovely phrase that if we can get away with it, our justification, we'll always introduce a slightly different slant to an argument. Shein may face increased scrutiny and potential regulatory actions impacting its long-term attractiveness, back to the hook, to investors, as seen in the quote, a float would subject the company to intense scrutiny. So using that quote without addressing it before the IPO. Nice future orientated. They're not quite at the IPO stage yet, so you can talk about what they should do before. Now, is it accurate knowledge throughout? Well, I think it probably is. I don't think we've got anything wrong. And have we used a good bit of context, and does it talk about the behaviour of the company, or in this case, the investors? Okay, definitely does. Have we got a minimum of 3 chains of argument? Hopefully a little bit more than that. Well, with the however point in context, it's very difficult not to write 5 chains or more, so I think we've got there. Is it balanced? Well, I'm not 100% sure that it is 100% balanced, to be honest with you. It's balanced. Is it perfectly balanced? Don't really know. Well, actually, we know it's not. It's weighted more towards the negative. I don't think it matters. I couldn't think of another way of writing it, to be totally honest with you. And both of these things are relatively negative, and we've put some positives in there. I'll take a couple of marks away. Is it wide-ranging and well contextualised? Well, definitely. Wide-ranging, as we know, is more than 2 arguments, and we've got P however, and we've got the justification, which is sort of another argument. I think that's more than 2 last time I counted. And we've got an awareness of competing arguments, definitely leading to a supported judgment. I think that that is not a bad judgment at the end there. Okay, so it's level 4. You can decide where it is. I don't really care at this stage. And hopefully that was useful.